it's not easy to stand out as a postdoc. There's 1,100 postdocs at UCSF, and a lot of 700 graduate students. So a big place, but we got to know each other pretty well. Had a lot of fun talking about just about everything. He said that you guys are interested in my background and how I got to science and kinds of things that have kept me excited and active. So I'll tell that story. If any of you have specific questions along the way, just break in. Don't wait for me to this silly narrative. So I've been a professor since 1976, before any of you were born. Except the old man. I was born and grew up in Des Moines, Iowa, and was brave enough to go 35 miles away to college, to Iowa State, and then since then have been just absolutely blessed with great mentors. Really lucky. Not great mentors through my choosing, but through luck. And there's a lot to be said for that. If any of you come to the workshop, I'll have a few words to say about mentoring. I think it's important. My first day at Iowa State, I ran into my assigned advisor was a guy named Jack Horowitz, and he basically took me under his wing. I had a fellowship, scholarship to go to school there, but I didn't really know much. I was a biochemistry major. It was a new major, relatively new major at Iowa State. I think it was about 3 or 4 years old. And I had decided, I'd gotten interested in molecular biology actually when I was 13. My dad subscribed to Scientific American, and Francis Crick wrote an article in the Scientific American, basically proposing the existence of messenger RNA. This is theory. Amazing. And I read that. I wanted to be a chemistry major, actually. I read that and thought, man, I want to do that. That sounds pretty good. But other than that, truth be known, I really didn't know what a scientist did, what they did when they got to work in the morning, what it was like. And I had this thing in my head that it was sort of an isolating, I think I had in my head an image of a guy in a white coat in sort of a dark lab, hunched over a microscope, never talking to anybody, all coming in the morning and looking at a microscope all day long and then going home. And so I didn't really know what a scientist was doing, but I chose the major anyway because I read this quick article. And the other thing I really liked in college was writing. And I had a creative writing professor who was great. And she liked me, but except for the fact that I was a science major. So she only gave, the highest grade I ever got from her was a B+. But I was taken enough with writing that in my sophomore year I called my dad and I said, I'm thinking of transferring to English because I like writing. And there was kind of a long pause on the phone. And he says, so what are you going to do for money when you grow up? And I didn't know the answer to that question, so it intimidated me and I didn't change my major. But it was because I had this thing in my head that science was this isolating, non-interactive endeavor. And it turns out, of course, as you all know, that it's exactly the opposite of that. And we succeed or fail in this business, maybe not as much as how smart we are, but not so far off how smart we are with our ability to interact with other people. And that's going to actually increase with the way that science is evolving right now, biological sciences. So the dependence on being able to successfully interact with other people, learn from them and work with them is going to be kind of a hallmark of the best science going forward. And that's really because, I'll just jump ahead and say that that's really because science, as biological physical sciences and the sciences in general have evolved to a point that they're going to move forward best by essentially merging. And so our concept, the old concepts that we had in our heads and the way we were able to train of chemistry and physics and math and computation and engineering and biology, all those fields are going to, in the most successful places, those fields will merge. Because I'm a biologist, I look at that merger through the prism of biology and think, oh, how cool, the kinds of things we'll be able to do as biologists when we use actively the tools and expertise and theories and methodologies of the physical sciences and engineering, math, computation. But people in those fields can be just as excited about what's going to happen in their fields.
Can I interject something?
Yeah, go for it.
So that was one of the first and most significant things that I remember Keith telling me. One of the first times I came to his office looking for academic positions, and his first words were, that I remember, note which were, Zach, just remember, no one gets here by themselves. No one gets here alone. And this is already after maybe 5 or 6 years, 7 years of busting your chops in the lab from sun up to sundown, or sun up to sun up, really.
Yeah.
and really trying to hunker down and try to really make stuff happen. And to hear someone of Keith's experience say, remember that no one gets here by yourself, really threw me for a loop. And I had to do a lot of reevaluation, because maybe a lot of you have gone or even experienced in that loop, saying, I have to do this, I have to do that, I have to do this. And it's all on me, and I have to prove myself. And this is the time right now to reevaluate that model and really start to look around and take advantage of those interactions that are going to occur.
Great. When I was an undergraduate, I started working in the lab when I was a sophomore, not long after talking to my dad, and published my first papers as an undergraduate, but was active in many things on campus. And when I went to Princeton, I don't know how you picked out your graduate schools, but I had it in my head to go work with a famous geneticist there. I applied to, 5 or 6 places, and the day that Princeton accepted me, I called the 2 places I hadn't interviewed at yet, and said, I'm not going to Princeton. And so the funny part of that story is that they had just started a program in which you could get your first rotation out of the way the summer before classes started. And the only catch was that they assigned your advisor to you, so you picking. And so they assigned me to this assistant professor, who had one student, and 1 technician. And his name was Bruce Alberts. He was a 3rd-year assistant professor. Clearly not doing very well. He only did 3 years and only 2 people in his lab. And I absolutely fell in love with him. He was a fantastic mentor, very incredibly supportive, and I'll probably tell a story or 2 about it this afternoon or later this morning. And he really sets the standard for me on not only how to do good science and pick good problems to work on, but how to interact with others in doing science, and interact with others in general. And so I was going to graduate school during the Vietnam War, and got involved in a lot of anti-war stuff. And in fact, I helped organize a great big peace rally on May 5th, 1970, which is a notable day because in the middle of the peace rally, somebody ran in with a note that said that 4 students had just been killed at Kent State. party politics because George McGovern was running as an anti-war candidate. And so, amazingly enough, I ended up taking 14 months leave of absence in my 4th year of graduate school, probably the most critical year, um, to help manage the McGovern campaign in New Jersey. And again, Bruce's blessing, he arranged to make sure that I could come back afterwards. I interviewed for postdoctoral fellowships during that time. It was really bizarre. I couldn't remember what I was working on. So I did that. I came back. I got a fellowship, fortunately, and did my postdoc with Gordon Tompkins in San Francisco. UCSF was just forming itself. Now, UCSF is an old school, but wasn't a good place. And they had hired Gordon Tompkins and another guy, Bill Rutter, to come in from the outside to try to create a good basic science department. It was not a research university. It was a kind of regional medical school. It wasn't a great medical school. It was kind of a good medical school. The graduate program was very weak. They had a lot of postdocs because they had a few big-time scientists. And I ended up, so Gordon tragically was another fantastic mentor. Again, a very supportive guy. And this is what you should be looking for, is people who have enough self-confidence that they can, feel free to support you. They don't feel like they've got to always do something for themselves. I published a paper by myself without Bruce's name on it as a graduate student. There's no way I would have suggested that to Bruce. Bruce suggested it to me. I still don't think I deserve to be single author on it. But he seemed to think so, so there it was. So forth. And as a result of that, there have been, right now, the count is 38 papers published in my lab without my name on it. Because it had such a huge impact on me. And I know how important it was for me. And so when someone in my lab, I think, merits that, then I push them to write a paper by themselves without my name. Something I'm really proud of. You know, ironically, it's something the study section once bashed me for. It's amazing. Yeah. Yeah, they thought I was leaving my name out because I didn't like I didn't support the word. Bizarre. So the mentoring makes a huge difference. Since becoming a professor at UCSF, I've gotten involved a lot in science and public policy. I go to Washington every couple of weeks. I'm going tomorrow. And I'm involved in leading or sitting on several committees and boards there that have to do with broad aspects of science policy and advocacy in Congress and so forth. I wrote in 1988, I got involved in co-authoring a book called Gene Wars. At that time, what my co-author thought was activities that the Department of Defense Biological Research Program was undertaking that subverted the international treaty against offensive biological warfare research. So then during that year after publication of the book, went to visit a lot of places where I would give a scientific seminar and talk about this. So that really got me engaged in policy and things. My policy activities really stem from the mentoring that told me that we depend on each other to make this field work. I don't know if you've recognized it, but this is one of the few fields where it is operated basically by the volunteer efforts of scientists. Reviewing papers, reviewing grants, sitting on search committees, many settings, many of the teaching functions are things that you do as a faculty member, but you're going to get promoted based on your research. So in many senses, it's taking time away from the metric that's used to evaluate your career in order to do something to help the endeavor move forward. There aren't very, I don't know of any, maybe any other professions like that. It's quite remarkable. I give a talk about the funding of biological sciences that starts out by saying, what would you do if you picked up a local paper and found a front page story that said that a special interest group had somehow managed to get a hold of $30 billion of federal money and spent it on themselves? That's the NIH peer review system. Right? But it sounds like an outrageous scandal. Right? And so when I say the success of the endeavor depends on the volunteer efforts of its best people, I mean that in many ways, and certainly one of them is putting aside self-interest. We're giving it time, reviewing grants and papers of competitors to help move their careers forward, and all of this to make the endeavor work. And the reason that the U.S. scientific research system is the best in the world is because of that. Right? It's because scientists are making the determinations of how that actually substantial amount of money is going to be spent. So we complain about the budget, but it's a lot of money. Right? It's about 1% of the federal budget. It goes to the NIH. That's a lot of money. Right? And so we complain. I complain. I go to Washington and complain. Yeah, but it's a lot of money. And so we have a responsibility as stewards of that money, since it's been really given to us to spend, to inform the public of what it is that we're doing with it, and to use it wisely. It's an incredible statement of trust and faith in us that says that the government will hand that kind of resources and power over to us. So I think it's a fantastic endeavor in that sense, and that all of us needs to be involved in some way in that kind of effort. And it's not something you have to wait on until you're an established professor. They're just things that can be done, even if it's at the level of hanging out in the lab and talking about a paper that your advisor has reviewed, or the kind of tone that you take in writing a paper yourself, and how much you credit the work that's gone before, and how expansively you think about the significance of that research. All of these things go to enrich the kind of fabric of the culture that make a difference in how we all are. We professors make jokes about the fact that you guys, people in the labs, start dressing like us and telling our jokes and stuff, despite the fact that it makes you crazy to think about that idea. But I did that, and we all do it. But the important part of that is not the superficial stuff, but that the standards that we set, the kinds of things, the ways that we talk about research, science, the relationship of science to society, the relationship of your work to that of competitor or collaborator, both, all sinks in too, just as much as the jokes and the flows, and will make a difference on how you behave as a scientist as you go on in this business.
So one of the things that I tell recruits that come in to my lab when we do recruiting for graduate students is that this is the only profession, professional degree profession where you as a graduate student, the first day that you step into your advisor's lab, you do the same work as him. The papers that you write are going to be reviewed by the same people that review his paper, my paper, your paper. And so you become colleagues, competitors, or peers, whichever adjective you'd like to use, of the whole scientific community. And no other profession is like that. I mean, imagine, would you want to have a brain surgeon by a first-year medical student? Probably not, right? Or would you want a first-year law student, defending your case? No. But when you go into the lab and you're doing experiments, and you put your work out to the public, it's the same audience, the same public that reviews his work, reviews my work, then review your work. So in that sense, from day one, you become a bigger part of the scientific community, and you're in a unique position, and so you have unique responsibilities as you step into a graduate program.
So the good graduate programs do exactly what Zach said, and that is they begin treating you like a fellow scientist from day one. And ironically, part of that is that they give you more to do than they possibly give you done. It's true. And because in many ways, if you think about it, a scientific project could be viewed, could be framed as a decision tree in which you've got to decide every day what not to do. Every experiment offers more pathways to go forward than you can possibly take. So most of the decisions are deciding what not to do. You make one decision about what to do, and a whole bunch about what not to do. And the same goes with how you spend your time. At UCSF, the students in rotation, I tell the students in rotation, and the ones that are taking my molecular biology course, you're not going to have enough time to do a great job with both of these things. You have to decide. You decide. We're not going to decide. You decide, do I really want to hunker down and do a fantastic job in this course, or I'm so excited about my research that the course is going to still pull with me. And it's okay. It's part of the deal. And you're going to have to do that all, basically every day as a professional, is deciding what you're not going to do. It's this funny feeling, I at least thought that I got into this business because everything I did as well as I could. And it's not very long before you realize that, in fact, you're not doing it. That, in fact, what's making you succeed or fail is your judgments about what you're going to put your time and effort into and what things you want. And so suddenly you're not doing everything that's on your plate as well as possible. It's just like evolution. Evolution doesn't maximize anything; it optimizes things. The optimization or a relationship. It's the way life is. Optimization is making a series of compromises in order to do things that are successful.
How does the advisor handle that? Because I can imagine they have to department, graduate students, postdocs, papers, grants.
Same way, exactly the same way. And I've gone through my life thinking that if I work any harder, I'm going to drop dead. I started thinking that when I was a postdoc, and stuff just keeps getting added on. So the capacity to do lots of things grows, fortunately. You have to be a little careful about getting carried away. I feel like I'm sort of in that boat sometimes, but you can handle both things. So I basically have 3 full-time jobs UCSF alone, and then the fourth in policy. I run the lab, I'm executive vice dean of school of medicine, and vice chancellor for research. Those are both big jobs, and commonly full-time jobs in many places. And then sit on a whole bunch of and chair committees in Washington. And so it's a constant juggling. Would my lab do better, or would people in my lab, you guys, if you were in my lab, do better if I wasn't doing all that stuff? Quite possibly. So when I interview somebody to come into my lab, the first thing I do is tell them that you're going to have to be more independent working in this lab than you would in another lab. And we also work very hard as a group, back to the group thing, to pick people that we think will be synergistic with others in the group. In a way, when I'm at UCSF, I'm only in the lab half the time, and then I'm also on the road. So I'm in the lab less than half the total time. And so that means that people have to get along with each other, support each other, and that's really a key part of it. So you build a community right then. So it's a juggling act, and it's a fun one. It's an interesting job. I think Jack will testify. It's never boring.
Never boring.
You haven't spent a lot of time bored yet, have you?
No. You don't have time to be bored.
Yeah, you're too busy. Yeah, you'd like to be, but you're really too busy.
That's when you know you succeed.
Yeah, exactly. So it's a fantastic occupation, and one that, and so, you know, I'm sure that you're aware of the pressures on the budget and all this other stuff. It's got people working, individual scientists and institutions. There are concerns, but you know, the opportunities are still out there. I think, in my opinion, they've actually grown. They haven't grown as much in academia as when I was in training, but they've grown in many other fields. So the ways to use advanced training in biological sciences are still very much increasing. We don't know where it's going to go. The potential impact of biological research on societal issues of all kinds. I was involved in writing a report in 2009 and said that this is going to be the century of biology, and there will be biological principles and methodologies that will allow us to address major societal problems that right now have no solutions in front of them in food and energy and environment and health. And if that plays out, if we're successful, then the need for people with advanced training in biological sciences across a whole spectrum of occupations in our society is going to increase a lot. And so it won't just be the conventional single track of starting out in training and then ending up as a professor, which is the way that I started training.
And that was one of the things that I recognized early on at UCSF is that they came, I think somewhere along the line, they came to the conclusion of the decision, the realization that everyone is not going to go into academic science. And so there at UCSF, they have lots of different programs that expose their students to, you know, all the options, maybe not all, but a lot of the options that are available with your degree. One of the former students in the lab that I came from, she was interested in policy. And so after she finished her qualifying exam, she took a semester off to go to DC to work at the National Academies of Science, and then came back into the lab and graduated, and now she works
For me.
for him.
Yeah.
doing she's
I was promoted to associate dean.
associate dean.
And she's right now assistant vice chancellor, but I think that'll change.
Yeah. So, so there's lots of possibilities out there. Business.
And Virginia Tech now has, there was the NIH had two committees to discuss the biological workforce. That term in itself has interesting confusion in it, because if you ask a professor about the biological workforce problem, he'll say, yeah, who's gonna do my experiments in my lab? Right? If you ask anybody else in the world, you guys and everybody else in the world, it's like, are we training the right number of people and focusing the right way? The professors are really fretting about who's gonna do their experiments. But one of the things that came out of one of the committees was a recommendation to provide some federal money to programs around the country that want to invent new ways to provide familiarity to their graduate students with the whole spectrum of occupations. And so the NIH awarded 10 of these awards last year, and Virginia Tech got one, UCSF got one. So I got to know some of your faculty through that way. It's great. They're great people. So it's good. You guys are at the forefront. Lots of great opportunities out there. Any questions for me?
Yeah.
Anything you want, any comments you want to make?
Well, maybe.
Like shall I stop in our direction?
You haven't said people picking up the mentor?
Yeah, yeah. I do. I think it might even be on, I may talk about that later. But I'll just say that somebody who really has your interest at heart, who wants to actually do work to help you here, who thinks broadly about where to try to help identify your kind of interest. And we're not so good at that ourselves. So there are ways to such things, those kinds of things out. And there are mentors who really work hard on them. And the other thing, and I'll say that this morning, is that don't feel like you just have to have one mentor. Mentors for different things in your life. And so finding mentors that will fit your needs is really important. Non-limited. There may be formal mentors that you're associated with. Zach and I work really well.
We want to get a group. We want to get a picture of everybody. Prove that you were here.
Yeah, let's do it. Yeah, give us some data.
You know, this is all right here.
What do you want over here?
Yeah. All righty. 1, 2, 3.
All right, well, thank you. Thanks a lot, guys.